Alright, I gotta point this out real quick. The comedic timing on this is fucking incredible. He just ollies into the frame and this other guy is peeking out of the window like, "Hey man, what you doing?" And then he extends his leg in this perfect snapping motion, and the exact moment his foot meets the guy's face, he just... I laughed my fucking ass off the first time I saw this. I could watch this clip a billion times. Speaking of GOTY candidates, we've learned many new things about the mechanics of Devil May Cry 5 in the last few weeks. And a lot of it happens to tie in nicely with my recent video on DMC4's functional design. I recommend giving that one a watch before proceeding here. But just to bring you all up to speed, functional design describes the idea of adding functions to a game for their own sake as opposed to as a tool intended for dealing with specific situations. It's something Devil May Cry 4 is rather guilty of, and knowing that, you can likely imagine my surprise over DMC5 seemingly going in the exact opposite direction, at least as far as Nero is concerned. The Devil Breaker system is likely the biggest point of contention with DMC5 among fans, and it's easy to see why. Every breaker grants Nero a different ability, and that kind of expansion to his moveset is what people have been yearning for since Devil May Cry 4. What a lot of players don't seem to be interested in though is resource management? Breakers are prone to, well, breaking under certain conditions, and new arms have to be picked up off of the ground as the battle progresses. In fact, contrary to other reports that have come out, there seems to be no way to change between different Devil Breakers without destroying the one that's currently equipped. You can only have 4 breakers in your magazine at a time, and they're always swapped out in a predetermined order. That's so sad. Alexa, play Subhuman by Suicide Silence.
I can't find Subhuman by Suicide Silence in your music library.
Now take a deep breath. I'm afraid to break it to you, but if you're part of the combo video crowd, you're unlikely to find peace with this admittedly restrictive system. This dichotomy is something I discussed in my previous video. While I can see the appeal in having instant access to like a billion moves for maximum creativity, I actually think this system has a lot of potential to make fights more dynamic and strategic. The individual breakers are all incredibly distinct from one another, and enemies seem to react to them in wildly different ways. The Goliath Battle from the demo is a good encapsulation of the trade-offs you'll have to make. The Buster lets you Mario 64 him into buildings, Overture is a good way to parry his bull rush, and Gerber lets you stay in the air and jump cancel the crap out of him indefinitely. Even just from watching the footage, every single ability feels incredibly powerful and like it's gonna carry you a long way. Wait a second, it's like DMC3! The breakers all seem equally viable, and the enemies have more general properties rather than requiring DMC4's more canned solutions. Having to get rid of a breaker to be able to switch to the next one is both a way to allow for more on-the-fly variety than DMC3's system, while also keeping that game's tight balance intact. The fact you're always at risk of breaking your arm and that you can't swap between them at will is what gives the designers free rein to pack as much utility into them as possible. A move like Air Jockey would be completely broken in any other scenario, but with this system you'll have to be careful not to get hit while it's in use, and if you do want access to another ability, you'll have to make the tough choice of throwing it away. The break age moves for every arm seem like another smart way to tie the mechanics together, and having to scour the environment for breakers adds a new layer of long-term strategy to the game that DMC never really had. I think it's brilliant. Itsuno has gone on record about his thought process behind the Devil Breakers, saying that he pictured Nero busting his arm, going "ah crap," and shoving his stump into a holster for a fresh cartridge to throw himself into the fight again. Remember that quote I had in my last video about how to design an action game you have to imagine the entire flow of the battle in your head? Looking at it this way is pretty illuminating of what the Devil Breaker system is meant to accomplish. It's meant to encourage a reckless playstyle in which you're constantly forced to adapt to circumstances that aren't necessarily under your full control. You're always thinking more about the situation at hand rather than the functions of your character. Look, I realize this isn't what every player is looking for in DMC, but I hope what I've said will convince you to go into the game with an open mind. I think the system has a lot of potential to deliver incredibly exciting battles, and I'm personally willing to sacrifice some of DMC4's creativity for that purpose. What about Dante though? Against all odds, it seems like DMC4's style system is being transplanted into 5 1-to-1 without any major alterations. And personally speaking, I can't say that's exactly what I wanted. Did Itsuno not watch my last video? Jeez! Like I alluded to previously though, DMC5 seems to mostly do away with 4's more puzzly enemy design, and judging from the footage, that's still true for Dante. There's very little in the way of enemies that expect you to obnoxiously trickster up to them or use canned tactics to open them up for damage. The shielded Angelo demons could be compared to DMC4's White Knights, but even they stay firmly on the ground. It's also worth noting that DMC5 now lets you pick which weapons Dante has access to at any time. You still cycle through them with a single button, but now you're given the choice of either restricting yourself to only 2 at a time like in DMC3, or taking up to 4 with you. This, by extension, means that there can never be a situation where certain moves are flat out required to damage enemies, and that every individual weapon has to be about equally viable. Note how every weapon we've seen so far has a launcher, which wasn't the case in DMC4. I am somewhat puzzled that they're not just going for a weapon wheel at this point, and I have to wonder if there's some kind of advantage to restricting yourself to only 2 weapons at a time. Other than it just being easier to keep track of. Overall though, this is a good change. Every one of Dante's actions also looks that little bit more user-friendly. Royal Guard is OD as hell, parrying with attacks like Pop Shredder seems noticeably easier, and ground movement in general is a lot more fluid and viable. Things like the John Wick shotgun rolls, Balrog's breakdance moves, or anything involving Cavalier all seem like they will make Trickster much less of a necessity. You can see in the footage that Dante just has a lot more freedom in the application of his styles now, because he's so much more mobile on a basic level. Whereas a lot of DMC4 Dante's moves could feel kind of limp held up against Nero, every single attack just packs way more of a punch here. And the ranking system seems to be ever so slightly more lenient to reflect that. I like it. My personal hope for Dante was that they'd reimagine him from the ground up again like they did with DMC3. And while that's not what we're getting, it's really hard to complain when it all looks so satisfying. I'm hopeful that a lot of the tweaks we're seeing will go away toward making the style system less intimidating, even if I see myself ultimately gravitating toward Nero or DMC3 Dante more. Moving on from just Nero and Dante, there's one other thing about DMC5 that's caused a bit of a stir among some people, and that's the continued lack of a dedicated dodge input. This wasn't an unreasonable addition to expect considering every action game since DMC4 controls like Bayonetta now, and that even the DMC reboot featured not 1 but 2 evade buttons. Yeah, that was a great idea. I'm gonna have to spill the tea once again though and say that if this is something you're really clamoring for, then I think you need to approach DMC5 with a different mindset. The series has traditionally always handled evasive maneuvers through the jump button, and the games are designed to lean into that fact. You're invincible on the startup of every jump, and the high gravity means that a short hop takes about as long to complete as a side roll. I've always felt that unifying these two functions not only makes intuitive sense for the pace of DMC's combat, but also serves as an elegant way to streamline the control system. DMC5 makes a few tweaks that will hopefully serve to make dodging just that little bit more intuitive for newcomers. Side rolls now go around the enemy in a circular motion, and aerial side flips have much more horizontal momentum. The latter's animation makes it look much more like an evasive maneuver than it did in previous games, which should help convey to newcomers how to use it properly. If my rundown of the Devil Breaker mechanic was a plea to combo fiends to give it a fair shake, this is me asking the same thing of more casual players. It's reductive to expect every game to control the same way, and the correct design choices for one game might not always make sense for another. Bayonetta's mechanics are tailored around the idea of holding the face buttons to attack and pressing a trigger to dodge in an incredibly specific way, and the lock-on is more of an optional help for situations that require more precision rather than this thing you're supposed to be using constantly. I get RSI just imagining having to press another shoulder button to dodge while I'm holding lock-on because all the face buttons are already taken, when I could just jump instead. Speaking of jumps, enemy step is reportedly going back to DMC3's more lenient system, which I think is a good change. I wouldn't want it to be as preposterously easy as the reboot, but 4 arguably took things a little far with how precise your inputs needed to be. Now, alright, I know y'all are gonna be like, hey you big asshole, why is jump cancelling being really simple to do a bad thing in the reboot, but not in a game like Bayonetta? The answer is really simple, my friends. They're different games. I have very specific expectations for what a Devil May Cry should be. The committed jumps, the high gravity, how enemies become helpless ragdolls in the air, it all contributes to the adrenaline rush of trying to squeeze out just 1 more second of extra airtime. That's what the series is inherently about to me, and DMC's system kind of runs counter to that. Bayonetta, on the other hand, has a completely different pace to it. It's floaty, enemies are far more aggressive, and staying in the air is as simple as holding the attack button. The fact that jump cancels are so easy just suits the flow of that series better. Do I have any final concerns? Well, the style meter might just be a little too lenient, though this might just be a quirk of the show floor demos we've seen so far. Also, is gravity even a thing in this game? I just mentioned how half the fun of DMC is struggling to stay in the air for as long as you can, but is jump cancelling even gonna be necessary when so many moves keep you suspended with no effort? No point getting our panties in a twist at this stage though. DMC5 looks incredibly promising, and I'm in love with all the callbacks to the first game especially. I probably won't talk about it again on this channel until the full game comes out in March, but who knows. My next video is scheduled for release pretty shortly, so look out for that. If you do want to keep up with my thoughts on DMC5 and other things Chew-Nee, feel free to follow me on Twitter. And just like in DMC5, earning an S rank with me is not too difficult. You just gotta leave a like and share this video with your friends. Catch y'all next time, bye bye!